participants we were expecting. We've got 50, it looks like, in the audience. Okay. Okay, well, thank you everyone who's here joining us today. We appreciate the opportunity and you're taking the time to join us for this presentation. My name is Rebecca Lane and I'm the manager of the Santa Rosa Housing Authority. And on our panel today, I'm joined by Martha Cheever, who is the manager of the Sonoma County Housing Authority. We also have some great institutional knowledge coming from Kathleen Kane, who is currently back with the Sonoma County CDC, the interim director of the Santa Rosa Housing Authority, Megan Bassinger, and we also may be able to hear from Dave Kipp if he's able to get here, the director of the Sonoma County Housing Authority. I give him credit for this idea and for organizing all of this. He was unfortunately called into a meeting at the last minute, but he may be able to pop in and say hello later. And then we also have Susan Ballstrom here from the CDC, and she'll be serving as our moderator today. So thank you so much, Susan. We we're going to be taking questions through the Q&A. Susan will be monitoring those throughout the presentation, and then we'll try and address the questions at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So what we're here today to discuss is the voucher program, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And this is a program that has a sort of a standard voucher type that everybody is used to, kind of the one that's been around the longest, or where the program started from, dating back all the way to housing certificates. If some of you in the audience have been around long enough to know about that. So the Housing Choice Voucher is our sort of main program. And we also, as you'll learn throughout the presentation, over the last several years, have received special purpose vouchers. And we'll talk about what those different programs are between our two housing authorities. The thing that you'll notice, and if you've noticed just over those last few years, we have not received any new kind of regular vouchers in many years. All of the new vouchers that have come to the programs, all of the different resources have been targeted to specific populations. So an example of that you'll hear about is the VASH vouchers, the Veterans Affairs vouchers, mainstream vouchers, family unification program vouchers. And these are generally all awarded to housing authorities through a competitive process, or the housing authorities, because of their performance in the regular voucher program and in other special purpose voucher programs, we are invited to participate because of our performance in the other program areas. So it's important for all of our program areas to be successfully leasing people onto the program so that we can make sure that we're utilizing all of our funding and all of our vouchers that are available. And so that's how largely over the last few years, how new funding has been made available in our community for the voucher programs. Next slide, please. So starting with just the regular kind of standard Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Santa Rosa Housing Authority has 1,489 regular Housing Choice Vouchers, meaning that these aren't targeted to a specific population. The Sonoma County Housing Authority has 2,879 of these vouchers. The program requirements for the regular Housing Choice Voucher Program are that the family who is coming onto the program has to be first from our waiting list. So we'll talk in more detail about the waiting list later, but each housing authority has its own waiting list for the program, for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and that is where the families coming onto the standard Housing Choice Voucher Program have to come from. They have to already be on our waiting list. Each of our housing authorities has a limited preference that serves people experiencing homelessness. What a limited preference means is that it's not applied to the entire waiting list, but we set aside a certain number of vouchers or a certain percentage of our turnover to that specific population. applicants on the Housing Choice Voucher Program can come from anywhere in the United States. This is a federal program, and so there's federal access to the program. So if you are a family who's living in Wisconsin and you have family here in Sonoma County, you can apply for the waiting list in Sonoma County and you can receive a voucher from Sonoma County, so long as you're willing to make the move out here to join your family here in Sonoma. The housing authorities are not allowed to give preference or limit applicants based on a jurisdiction, again, because these are federal dollars. So the program has to be accessible to anyone in the country. The residency requirements or the restriction that applies is that, generally speaking, if you have applied for and are receiving, you've come to the top of the waiting list for the Sonoma County Housing Authority, for example, you need to live in that jurisdiction, the jurisdiction that's giving you the voucher, for the first 12 months of your tenancy. That's just to make sure that that housing authority that is administering the assistance can get all the paperwork together, do all the initial things that have to be done in that first year of the program. But then after that, the voucher is totally portable, which means that if you did come from Wisconsin, you can go back after that first year. You can also apply, because this is a federal program, you can apply to multiple waiting lists. So if you're the family in Wisconsin who has family out here in Sonoma, but you've always wanted to live in Florida, you can also apply for a waiting list in Florida. If you come up on that list, you can go there to get it. So where you apply or where you live when you apply for the waiting list doesn't have any impact on the portability of the assistance or your ability to move throughout the country. For the Standard Housing Choice Voucher Program, applicants will undergo a background check that looks back 3 years for violent and drug-related criminal activity, and persons subject to lifetime registration under any state sex offender program are prohibited from participating. Between our two housing authorities, we're just focusing here, the Santa Rosa Housing Authority jurisdiction for the Standard Housing Choice Voucher Program is anywhere within the city limits of Santa Rosa. And for the Sonoma County Housing Authority, the jurisdiction is all of the unincorporated areas of Santa Rosa, as well as all the other cities and towns in Sonoma County and the unincorporated parts of Sonoma County. I mentioned that, generally speaking, a family is required to stay in the jurisdiction where they've received the voucher for the first 12 months, but this is something that can be waived if the family requires a reasonable accommodation. For example, if a family is living in Cloverdale in a fully accessible, wheelchair accessible unit, but comes up to the top of the Santa Rosa Housing Authority waiting list and they do not wish to move, that's an example of an accommodation that can be provided for a family who has disabled household members to meet their physical needs. Next slide, please. So the project-based vouchers are a component of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and it ties the voucher assistance to a specific unit in a development. Housing authorities are allowed to project-base up to 20% of our vouchers, and an additional 10% may be project-based if the units meet specific requirements, providing permanent supportive housing to people who are homeless or other special populations. The project-based vouchers are awarded to developments on a competitive basis, so that's through a request for proposals. And the Sonoma County Housing Authority currently has 415 project-based vouchers that are either committed to or in use in certain projects. The Santa Rosa Housing Authority currently has 399 project-based vouchers that are either committed to projects or in use in projects. That's 21% of our total program count. So we have gone over that sort of standard allowance into the additional 10% for special populations And for Santa Rosa, those two populations are people experiencing homelessness and veterans. And Martha wanted me to mention here that in January of 2022, the Sonoma County Housing Authority will be opening a request for proposals for project-based vouchers for units that are dedicated to people who are homeless. Next slide, please. So the VASH program, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, is one of our first special purpose programs that we'll be talking about today. The Santa Rosa Housing Authority has 414 of these vouchers, and the Sonoma County Housing Authority has 15 of these vouchers. This is one of the first special purpose programs that I had the honor of working on developing here in the city of Santa Rosa. The Santa Rosa Housing Authority received our first allocation of VASH vouchers in 2009. And this is a special purpose program that requires that if you're participating as a housing authority in the program, then you follow the rules of that program. In this case, the service partner in the program is the Department of Veterans Affairs. So in the VASH program, it's designed to provide permanent supportive housing for veterans. So the VA provides the clinical and clinical case management and other supportive services, and the housing authorities provide the rental assistance. The other rules that apply to this program is that there are no criminal background checks other than the prohibition on lifetime sex offenders. And this is also one of the programs, the special purpose programs. All of our special purpose vouchers, we have an agreement between our two housing authorities that we will cross jurisdictional boundaries for these special programs. So the Santa Rosa Housing Authority has tenant-based vouchers as well as project-based vouchers outside of our jurisdiction. And the reason for that is just really that it's easier on the family and it's easier on the service provider as well as the housing authority when we don't have to do the portability process if the tenant who's participating in one of those special purpose programs wants to move just outside of our jurisdiction. As you know, the city limit boundaries can be pretty tight. We've got county islands inside the city limits, so it's just a lot easier on everybody if we can cross boundaries for these special purpose programs. So the housing authorities have agreed to do that. VASH can also be project-based. So as I mentioned, we have Windsor Veterans Village, which just had the grand opening recently. But not all of the special purpose programs can be project-based. So this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing. Next slide, please. The emergency housing vouchers are a new program. This was authorized under the American Rescue Plan in 2021. This is an example of a special purpose program that may not be project-based. The partner in the administration of the emergency housing vouchers is the Continuum of Care. Santa Rosa Housing Authority received 131 of these vouchers, and the Sonoma County Housing Authority has received 153. Our service partner is, as I mentioned, the Continuum of Care, and the referrals for this program have to come through the coordinated care or the coordinated entry system. In this program, applicants will undergo a background check that looks back 12 months and is only looking at violent criminal activity. And again, the lifetime sex offender prohibition applies. In this program, applicants can immediately take their voucher to any other jurisdiction in the United States. That initial 12 months of residency doesn't apply to this program. And we have also, again, the two housing authorities have agreed to carry forward our interjurisdictional agreement that will allow us to take out that extra step of portability processing in the administration of these vouchers. So you may see that a Santa Rosa Housing Authority voucher is administered outside of the city limits for this program, and likewise, Sonoma County may be administering vouchers inside city limits under the EHV program. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next couple of programs are just at Sonoma County, so I'm going to let Martha take over for a few minutes.
So the Mainstream Voucher Program is relatively new to the Sonoma County Housing Authority. We were first awarded in 2019. We've had 3 awards in total for 231 vouchers. The NOFA process for this heavily prioritized agencies who work closely with Sonoma with their behavioral health in their county, as well as their human services program. So we went after these aggressively and entered into agreements with those 2 agencies as partners. So these are special purpose vouchers, and they're only available for households who have non-elderly persons, so ages 18 to 62, who are disabled. So once a person hits 63, if they're not actively leased up, they are no longer eligible. So it can be tricky if a person is referred to us at the age of 62 and they take a really long time and haven't found housing by the time of age 63, because then they're no longer eligible and we have to withdraw the voucher. However, if someone is leased up when they turn 63, then they can continue to use it until such time that they either pass away or they leave the program. So another requirement of this is that applicants must be homeless, at risk of homelessness, or at risk of institutionalization in order to be eligible. Again, with this program, we're not allowed to give preference to applicants based upon the geographical area that they reside at when they're residing in when they're referred. So between Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, even outside of our agency, we're not allowed to give preference or take that into consideration. Vouchers may be referral based from local supportive service providers or coordinated entry system. However, we have to pull everyone off of our main wait list who is eligible before we go to the referral system. So, and like the Housing Choice Voucher Program, these applicants will undergo a background check. We look back 3 years for violence or drug-related criminal convictions, and lifetime sex offenders are prohibited from participating. So as our other special purpose vouchers, Santa Rosa and Sonoma County have an interjurisdictional agreement, which allows these applicants to lease up in either jurisdiction without having to undergo portability. So with the exception of reasonable accommodations, these vouchers do have to be used within Santa Rosa or Sonoma County for a year before they can transfer to another jurisdiction. Next voucher. Thank you. So we have some special subsets of our voucher program here at the Sonoma County Housing Authority. One of them is the Family Unification Program. These are included in our total standard housing choice voucher count. However, they are specially funded and were awarded to us via 2 competitive NOFA processes. We just received an additional 59 that's included in this 117 this past year. So these vouchers are strictly referral based, and the referrals come from Sonoma County Family, Youth, and Children's Services, and they're designated for 2 specific populations. One is for families who've had their children removed from their household, and they've gone through all of the steps and requirements that the courts have placed on them, and stable housing is the last requirement in order for the children to be returned to the household. So we receive referrals from Family, Youth, and Children. The families are then working with Interfaith Shelter Network, and will issue the voucher. And the other population these are designated for are youth that are aging out of the foster care system. They have to be within 90 days of leaving the foster care system, and the voucher is only good for 3 years for this population. So again, like Rebecca mentioned earlier, we do have an interjurisdictional agreement allowing these clients to lease in either jurisdiction. Some other subsets that the Sonoma County Housing Authority have, they're not mandated by HUD, but we have as an agency determined that it's a good use of our vouchers. We have roughly 10% of our annual turnover vouchers we've earmarked as a move on program. So it's a special preference. So this allows people who have successfully completed a permanent supportive housing program to be referred by the supportive services provider to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So the idea is this will open up some room in the PSH program and allow that person to get permanent housing via another subsidy. Another special purpose population that we have a pilot program for reentry. So these are for folks who are exiting incarceration and are working with probation department's supportive services provider that they're contracted with. In this case, it's also Interfaith Shelter Network. And this is a pilot program. It's slated to end December 31st, 2020, unless it's extended, but it's been highly successful. We've earmarked 15 vouchers a year for this program. Referrals come from Interfaith Shelter Network, and they help folks find housing. We currently have 16 folks, households leased up on this program, and about 10 households searching for housing. So next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the vouchers that we have in each housing authority that we've gone over. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the voucher purposes. I just want to point out that there is one error on this under project-based vouchers. These are waitlisted. However, they're awarded via request for proposal to developers or property owners. So again, this is just a snapshot. Go ahead and next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of our waitlists programs versus referral-based programs. So again, the Housing Choice Voucher Program and our project-based voucher program are strictly waitlist-based. And strictly referral-based programs include the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing, or VASH program, the Family Unification Program, the Sonoma County Housing Authority's Move On program, and the Reentry Pilot Program. The other programs that may be referral-based, but they don't have to be, are the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, the Mainstream Voucher Program, and both housing authorities limited preference for people who are experiencing homelessness. So next slide, please. All right, I'll let Rebecca start on this one.
Okay, so the waiting list, we do, because we have two separate housing authorities here, we're two separate agencies, and we also, despite how closely we work together and in the administration of these programs, we are required to have two separate waiting lists. And because of just historical nature of things, the Santa Rosa Housing Authority and the Sonoma County Housing Authority do look a little bit different. So the Santa Rosa Housing Authority waiting list is organized by lottery and by month of application. So what that means is that generally speaking, we open our waiting list once every 2 years. And if you apply in that month that the waiting list is open, then you're in a group of people who've applied in a certain year. All of the people that have applied during that time are then randomized. So there's a lottery determining where within that year of applicants you fall in the rank. So you could be the very first person on the list for your application year. That's determined by lottery. So that's why I say it's determined by both the lottery and the month of your application. So we are currently bringing people off the top of our waiting list, those families that we are working with right now. Applied for the waiting list in 2012. As I mentioned, it's generally open once every 2 years for new applicants. And then we update it in the alternate years, which means that we reach out to everybody who's on the housing authority or on the waiting list, excuse me. And we ask them to confirm that they are still interested in the program, making sure that we have all their current contact information. So that's a process that takes place in the alternate years. We currently, we just opened our waiting list in October, September and October of this year. So we added quite a few households to our waiting list, and that brings our current waiting list to 7,950 households. And the project-based voucher program, kind of the interplay with the waiting list, is that you do have to be offered, if you're on our waiting list, if you're on the Housing Authority's waiting list, and you are eligible for one of the project-based units, then we are required to notify you of the availability of a project-based unit. And if you determine that you're interested in that project, then we sort of create a subset of the waiting list for those projects. And then once we've notified everybody on the waiting list about that particular opportunity, then that waiting list for the project-based units can open up to the general public. So for Santa Rosa, our two waiting lists are two project-based waiting lists that are currently open to the public, which means that you don't have to already be on our waiting list, on our regular waiting list. You can go and apply just specifically to the project. Those two sites are the Rosenberg building in downtown Santa Rosa and the Bethlehem Tower, which is also close to downtown. That's a senior project. The Rosenberg is for seniors and for people with disabilities. And I'll let Martha talk about how the Sonoma County Housing Authority waiting list is organized.
So I think that waitlist organization is probably the one place where we run things a little bit differently. So I saw in the chat about someone saying we revamped the waitlist. So that was the Sonoma County Housing Authority, not Santa Rosa. So in 2019, we did revamp our waitlist. We had about 26,000 people on the waitlist, and after a fair housing audit by HUD, we just determined that the best way to go about it was just to cancel the existing wait list and start fresh. So what we do now is we hold an open application period. At that time, we did open our app. We just completed the 500 applicants who were selected back in 2019. So we just gave every single person on that wait list an opportunity to be served, and we have reopened a wait list. This current wait list we opened in October 21. We're going to place 750 applicants who will be randomly selected for placement on the wait list. So we're not looking at the geography of them. We're not looking at where any of the applicants are from. We're not looking at anything other than just a random selection of 750 applicants. So once this wait list is created, everyone will be notified. So just so everyone knows, that's going to be probably starting the process. The yes people who made it on will be notified in the next 2 weeks. And then the other folks will be notified probably the beginning of January that they didn't make it on the wait list. So it does create some disappointment for people who don't make it onto the wait list. However, those who do make it on the wait list will have an opportunity for service. And in 2 years, we'll be probably opening the wait list up again. We do run our project-based voucher program a little differently than Santa Rosa as well. We have, I think, probably 25 different project-based voucher wait lists that open up periodically. And we run those by both location. So for instance, Crossroads, we have a wait list for 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, and 3-bedroom units. So, and as needed, we open those back up. So those are more dynamic and they open and close more frequently. We have a notification link on our website that people who want to be notified when we have wait lists open and close, they can sign up and they'll get an email notification. So in a nutshell, that's how our wait list operates. So, and so far it's been really fantastic. You know, our previous wait list, people were just never going to be reached. And now people actually get the opportunity for service. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so once you've reached the top of the waiting list, once an applicant family reaches the top of the waiting list, then what happens next? So if you're determined eligible for the program, then you will receive a voucher. And both the Sonoma County and the Santa Rosa Housing Authority waiting list are currently issuing 120 days for that initial housing search. So from the day you receive your voucher briefing, which is the rules and regulations of the program, it's orientation to the program for the family. You receive your voucher, you have 120 days from that day to find a unit and let us know that that's the one that you want to rent. So the paperwork that's associated with that process is called the request for tenancy approval. So the family will have the landlord fill that out, and that will be returned to the housing authority. That one document includes all, as long as it's completely filled out, will include all the relevant information that the housing authority will need to determine whether or not the family can rent that unit and what the portion of rent will be for the family and for the housing authority in that unit. Next slide, please. So that determination of how much the housing authority will pay and how much the tenant will pay, very broadly, what the tenant can expect to pay is 30% of their monthly adjusted income, with the housing authority paying the rest of the rent directly to the landlord. But of course, it's not quite that simple. So the next couple of slides will go into some detail on the slides, but I'm going to try and keep it sort of broad in the conversation. So the tenant will be paying between 30 and 40% actually of their monthly adjusted income towards their share of rent. But the housing authority cannot, we are statutorily prohibited from allowing a tenant to move in to a new unit and signing a new lease if their rent burden would be more than 40% of their adjusted gross income. We can't set them up for that kind of strain on their affordability. The whole point of the program is that the unit is affordable to the family. So next slide, please. So our payment standards play into the calculation of how we're going to determine what portion of rent the housing authority is paying and what portion that the family is paying. And it also helps determine whether or not the family can, quote, afford that particular unit. So this is another one of the places where the Sonoma County Housing Authority and the Santa Rosa Housing Authority work very cohesively together on determining the fair market rents. So we are considered part of the same metropolitan statistical area. So that means that our fair market rents are generally, at least in the last few years, have been determined to be the same throughout the Sonoma County jurisdiction and Santa Rosa's jurisdiction. HUD allows us as housing authorities to take those fair market rents when they're released and set payment standards between 90% and 110% of those fair market rents. So if HUD has determined the fair market rents for the area, locally you're allowed to take those numbers and make slight adjustments for your conditions in your local community. We have, for the last several years, taken the payment standards and increased them to the maximum that we're allowed, which is 110% of the fair market rents. So this slide just goes over what those actual numbers are. And these payment standards, what they can be sort of loosely described as is the cap of what the housing authority can allow a family to rent and this considers both the utilities and the rent. So the contract rent plus the utilities needs to be in this ballpark of the payment standards. We also are allowed under the federal regulations to increase this payment standard. We can make the local decision to increase the payment standard as a reasonable accommodation. That's what the RA only means on that last column. So this means that if you are a family who has a disability related need for a specific unit that doesn't fall into those payment standards, we're allowed to increase it to 120% of the fair market rent. Next slide, please. So these are the slides that have a lot of detail. I'm not going to go torture you with the line by line, but we just want to give a couple of examples of how it can be very difficult to answer general questions for families or landlords or anybody who's interested in how the rental calculation works, because there's so many variables in each calculation. It depends on the unit, it depends on the utilities that are paid for in the unit, what type of utilities those are, for example, gas or electric, stove and heat. And it also depends on the family's income and the particular adjustments to the family income that the Housing Authority is required to make based on their circumstances. So this first calculation is a family that's receiving $600 per month in SSI with no other income and has selected a 1-bedroom unit, is interested in a 1-bedroom unit. Because of the payment standard, which for this unit is going to be $1,703 for a 1-bedroom unit. That's pretty close. The contract rent on the unit is $1,700. The payment standard on the unit is $1,703, and the tenant does have to pay some utilities out of pocket. So this unit isn't going to work out for this tenant. The Housing Authority would not be allowed to approve a tenancy where the family would be paying more than 40% of their adjusted income towards their rent and utilities. Next slide, please. This is another situation. In this case, the rent's a little bit lower, same family, same income level. And because the rent is a little bit lower here, $1,620 a month. Also, the utilities, there's a little bit of adjustment in the utilities. The family will be able to rent this unit. And if you want to, you can go through the slides in more detail. I think I saw something pop up in the chat about whether the slides will be available. I'm sure that we can arrange to do that. And you can go through these line by line and follow the calculation. Next slide, please. We also wanted to touch just briefly on a question that comes up, which is regarding mixed families. So under the HUD regulations, a mixed family is defined as one where there are some household members that are undocumented, that are ineligible non-citizens, meaning the Housing Authority is not allowed to subsidize their assistance. They're allowed to live in the household as a family. The family can stay together, but the Housing Authority may not provide assistance for any of the household members that are undocumented or ineligible non-citizens. So in this example that we're providing here, the rental calculation is where the household has 3 people, 1 child and 2 adults, and 1 household member of this 3-person household is an ineligible non-citizen, which means that we can provide 60% of the full housing subsidy that we would otherwise provide to a household where all 3 of the members were eligible citizens, or eligible non-citizens. So this slide goes over that type of calculation. The important thing to remember is that, yes, families who have undocumented members are eligible for the program to live in the unit, so long as someone in the household does have eligible immigration status. Next slide, please. So for the types of housing that we're allowed to subsidize, we are currently, both of our housing authorities are allowing single room occupancy housing. The payment standard is a little bit different for that type of program. Also shared housing, again, payment standard is a little bit different. What we do is take if 2 tenants are sharing a 2-bedroom household, and one of those tenants, the owner of the house, let's say, is renting out a room, that's something that we can provide assistance for, but we would take the 2-bedroom payment standard and prorate it for 1 bedroom that the family is, or that the individual is renting in that unit. We can also provide assistance for manufactured homes, for congregate housing, and for group homes. Next slide, please. The habitability standards are pretty basic. I understand that sometimes, you know, there's conceptions out there in the community that the inspection standards are very stringent or that the Housing Authority is unreasonable in our requests, but really these are the very basic things that we need to look for. It's a very important component of this program that families get to rent housing that is also safe and decent. So when we go out and do our inspections, this is what we're looking for. We're making sure that the units are sanitary, that there's adequate space for food preparation and to dispose of garbage, that there's adequate space and security throughout the unit. We are very serious about lead-based paint requirements. We make sure that if there are certain requirements about peeling paint, things like that. If those conditions exist in a unit, then the landlord will need to correct those conditions before a family can move in, particularly one that has a household member who's under the age of 6. The windows need to be all working and able to open and not dangerous or presenting any safety issue. The units are going to require now both carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. The doors need to be securable with deadbolts, and we can't allow the family to be living in a unit that has holes in the walls or the floors or anything like that. Things like that need to be repaired before a family can move in. And if they have occurred while a family is residing in the unit and we discover these conditions through an annual inspection, then the landlord will need to make those corrections. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the last slide, we do housing quality standards, HQS inspection prior to the family moving into a new unit, and then biennially after that. So HUD has recently allowed the housing authorities to conduct inspections every other year. And that has allowed eased some of the burden on the landlords insofar as how often we're coming by, and it also we have seen that our community has responded well to that adjustment. We also will do requests if a family or a landlord requests that the housing authority come out to do an inspection because of a particular circumstance that has arisen in that unit. We'll do that. And then we're also required under the regulations to do quality control inspections, which means that we come back out and we sort of audit our own work and do re-inspections of a certain number of the move-in and the biennial inspections. Next slide, please. These are examples of units or conditions rather that would require a 24-hour repair if we were to find them. So these are all very reasonable. It's very reasonable to expect that if someone didn't have any running hot water or didn't have any functioning toilet in the unit, that would be a condition that needed to be repaired right away. Anything that presents a significant health or safety hazard is something that would need to be addressed immediately, and the housing authority would provide notice that explain that to the landlord and to the tenant. Next slide, please. So we do allow a month-to-month lease. That's something that is a decision that a housing authority can make on a local basis as to whether or not they want to require a 12-month lease from the beginning, but because of the conditions of our local market, we have determined that we don't necessarily need to require that, but we do like it because of the sort of stability that will provide. We also are allowed to approve master leases. So this is something that we're seeing a lot with service providers. So if a service provider is renting a home and then renting those individual bedroom units to participants in their programs, that's fine. We're happy to work with that. We just need to sort of create a paper trail back to the original owner of that unit. So we'll need a copy of the master lease for that program. And I'm going to turn it over to Martha because I realized I was supposed to do that one slide ago. So go ahead.
Not a problem at all. I was just trying to go through and answer some of the questions in the chat. So how long is a voucher good for? Generally speaking, it's until the person leaves the program. So project-based vouchers after a person, so these are vouchers again that are applied to a very specific unit in a development. So after a tenant lives in that unit for 1 year, they can request from the housing authority to be moved onto the housing choice voucher program. And if the housing authority has available vouchers, which I believe that we both do, they will be allowed to transfer to that program and find a unit in the general population of rentals. So a tenant can be removed from a rental assistance program at any time for violating program rules. That could include violent criminal activity, just persistent lease violations, not paying their portion of the rent. Tenants' income can go up and they can income out of the program, or they can get to a point where they're living in a unit and now the housing authority isn't paying any assistance to the family. We're allowed, I believe it's 180 days that a tenant can be in the unit while still on the program when the housing authority is not paying any assistance. And after that 180 days, we statutorily have to remove them from the program. Tenants very frequently voluntarily leave the program. Their life circumstances change and they want to let the next person on the waiting list have the assistance because they don't need it anymore. And then also if there's a single member family and that person passes away, the housing authority may only pay until the end of that month. So in the situation where a tenant passes away, let's say on December 29th, regrettably, the housing authority can only pay until December 31st. If somebody passes away on January 1st, we can pay through January 31st. So it's kind of a tricky situation sometimes with landlords, but it's statutory, so we can't change that. Next slide, please. So why should a landlord consider working with the housing authority? So I think the housing authorities are great partners. We guarantee our rent payments go out. You know, our housing authority rent payments will hit somebody's bank account by the 5th business day of the month. So if a tenant loses their job, loses their income, whatever, the housing authority typically, generally speaking, will pay more in the rent. So the landlord doesn't have to worry about that. I think that's been particularly impactful this past year during COVID. We've seen a lot of tenants' income fluctuate dramatically. And in most cases, the housing authority has picked up the slack. Additionally, like Rebecca spoke of, we inspect the unit every 2 years, and occasionally we have a landlord request a special unit inspection or a tenant request a special unit inspection. I just saw a question I can address right now. If the tenant has, say, mold in their unit and they want they should report it to the housing authority. The housing authority can come out and look at the unit and determine, you know, what needs to happen. If it's life-threatening, you know, there will be 24 hours. Otherwise, we give the landlord time to correct the situation. And really, most importantly, is we're invested in making the tenancy work. So we want to be a good partner for the landlords and help them have a successful experience also. I think one of the biggest things that some landlords don't understand is that we're not property managers and we don't replace the property management. So we really need property managers to continue to do that and keep the housing authority in the loop. So when a tenant violates their lease obligations, we want to know. Tenants have a lot to lose, you know, if they violate if they get kicked off the program, and lease violations are included in that. So what happens is a landlord will contact us that, you know, so-and-so hasn't paid their rent, and then we proactively contact the tenant and say, hey, you know, you need to keep up your family obligations or we're not going to be able to continue to provide assistance to you. So, you know, we really strive to be good partners to the landlords. Next slide, please. So, and I think Housing Authority collaboration, I hope that you heard throughout this whole PowerPoint that we collaborate very heavily. I think the Santa Rosa Housing Authority and the Sonoma County Housing Authority recognize that, you know, having two housing authorities can be confusing. So we really work to make sure that we remove any artificial barriers or anything that can be confusing, just to make things flow more seamlessly between the two jurisdictions. As Rebecca pointed out, we match payment standards. We allow lease up on all of our special purpose vouchers in either jurisdiction, and there's ongoing communications. I did see in the chat something about project-based vouchers being leased up in either jurisdiction. So we do allow the VASH vouchers to be project-based in the jurisdiction of Sonoma County, and I believe that there are several. I know Windsor Veterans Village has several Palms Inn. So yes, we do allow special purpose vouchers for VASH program to be leased up in the county. Next slide. And that is all of our formatted slides, but we are at your disposal. I know that there are a number of questions that we can go through and answer. So one of the ones that I see, why only 4,500 vouchers for Sonoma County? That's just HUD determined that was at some point. The housing authorities have been around since the early 70s, and that's what they gave us. I think Kathleen might be able to answer that a little bit better. So
I would just add that the numbers are based on the populations. The long and short of it is this is not an entitlement program. So the number of vouchers is really a block grant that makes these number of units available through congressional action. So if there was more funds put into the Section 8 program, the Housing Choice Voucher Program by Congress, then we might receive more vouchers. There's just not enough resources to go around.
okay, and then I see, does Santa Rosa have a housing authority because they're the largest city in Sonoma County? They have a housing authority, and I can let Rebecca talk more about this, because they're an entitlement jurisdiction, and as such, they are entitled to have a housing authority, and they choose to do so. Rebecca, do you have any other?
No, that's it. That, and you know, like you said earlier, Congress and what Kathleen said about the population side.
And Martha, if I can interject, I just say that Santa Rosa's Housing Authority has been in place for 50 years now. So we've been a long established role in the community.
Right. So I don't know what an LPR person is. Rebecca, do you know? It says, is an LPR considered a non-eligible citizen? I don't know what that acronym means. Okay. Okay, here's one for you, Rebecca. What are the heating requirements for units? The language in HQS is very general.
Well, there's going to be heating requirements around sort of average temperature. So off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I believe it's something about maybe like October through April. You know, that basically you have to have functioning heat in the unit. That's the answer to that question, and it's more critical during colder months. So if we have somebody's heat go out in June and it happens to be a cold spell, you know, that may or may not necessarily be a situation that requires a 24-hour fix, but you do have to have heat during the colder months, and they have to be functioning. Portable heaters, generally speaking, no, it has to be some kind of permanent heating source. You can have portable heaters as long as you're using them safely in other parts of the unit. For example, if you want to put an extra space heater or something in a bedroom, as long as that's being used safely, that's fine. But there does need to be some kind of permanent source of heat.
So one of the other questions in the chat is, does the Housing Authority support families with zero income to pay for housing application fees? Specifically for the EHV program, are there any resources you can recommend for this? So each housing authority does have a very limited amount of money that we can support application fees with. However, we can only do so via statutory requirements if there are no resources available by the supportive services provider or in the community. So it's kind of a wonky thing there, but yeah, the short answer is yes, we do have them. The long answer is so long as there are no other resources available for that.
I think I saw in the chat the clarification that LPR is legal permanent resident. So generally, that is somebody who's going to be considered eligible non-citizen, but we're required to do a verification of that through INS.
So I have another question in the chat. Would child endangerment felony prevent client from obtaining a voucher? Conviction occurred within the past 3 years. I think that Rebecca and I are both on the same page. That would probably be a denial initially. And then every single applicant is offered who is denied is entitled to an informal review, where they come before the informal review officer in Sonoma County Housing Authority, it's myself, and explain the situation and the circumstances surrounding it and just get an impartial view on it. We do see a lot of these folks come through on our family unification program. That's what it's geared for, is to, get families back together after the parents have done what they need to do. Rebecca, do you have anything to add on that?
No.
Okay. And then how are emergency voucher recipients chosen? Can I ask coordinated entry to prioritize specific clients? So the coordinated entry system has set up several work groups. I can see about getting you linked in with those. They've made several target populations for domestic violence, chronic homelessness, rapid rehousing, move on, PSH move on. Long story short, there are work groups that you need to get plugged into for referrals. I will let you take the next one, Rebecca. Are domestic violence convictions excluded from eligibility? Specifically, are VAWA convictions excluded?
Sorry, I don't know where you're reading that from. There's like windows popping up.
Yeah, all over the place.
I'm not very good at this part. So, violent criminal activity is something that we do have to take pretty seriously. So, there's circumstances that we would be sort of considering in terms of when the offense occurred and whether it was a felony or misdemeanor. But, violent criminal activity is something that we do have to take seriously. And if it does result in someone being denied for assistance, then as Martha mentioned, there is always an appeal process for that decision.
Right. And every applicant is given all of the VAWA documentation at application intake. We have to have it signed by every member of the household. So we make sure that the VAWA information is out there. So if someone, is denied, they have an opportunity during the informal review process to explain to us that this happened as a result of, violence against me. So it's never a flat out denial unless it's a lifetime sexist offender. So Kevin McDonald asked, 1489 plus 279, is that the total? That is the total number of housing choice vouchers in Sonoma County between the two housing authorities. So they're added together, just administered separately. So Catherine Beltran asked, how are vouchers being impacted by lack of housing inventory for the community? I don't think that impacts our vouchers. It impacts the amount of time that applicants are taking to lease up in the community. And I think the the Santa Rosa Housing Authority and the Sonoma County Housing Authority were very aware of that. So we're very flexible with with COVID, we've pretty much kept all vouchers sort of out there and allowed people to look. But we have been very flexible in allowing for extensions. So Margaret asked if they have another way to pay for utilities, can it qualify? So it's part of the rent calculation conundrum. So if someone's paying, let's say Reach for Home is paying for someone's utilities on an ongoing basis, then that would be included in their monthly income. So we would take that income and calculate it into their income, and we would allow it. One of the tricky things that we get into are, supportive services providers. We see this particularly with households with undocumented family members. Supportive services providers, wanting to help this family get into a house, and it's like, okay, we're going to pay their utilities. So, we'll take that and include it in their income. It gets them under the 40% cap. And then, 6 months later, the funder, the supportive services provider, doesn't have ongoing funding to pay those utilities. And now suddenly the tenant is at 90% or 110% of their income. So it's just, if that situation does happen, we just want you to be very thoughtful about how that could impact the tenant down the road. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Did we already answer the mold question, Rebecca? I think so. Okay.
Yeah, mold is a tricky one, but yes, it's certainly something that, again, we're going to take pretty seriously. We would also be working closely with the landlord to really, in any of these situations, HQS situations, to understand what actions the property owner is taking in order to mitigate that. Oftentimes with mold in particular, our local code enforcement offices might get involved. And then, for something like that, when a code enforcement officer has taken a case, then we're going to be, following whatever those requirements are for that mitigation process.
Okay, so Allison Ball asked, what is the best way for a tenant to get the housing authority help when the apartment complexes refuses to follow up on maintenance problems after multiple written requests? I would encourage the tenant to contact the housing authority, and the housing authority would then contact the landlord. If there's an issue, we can always, abate rent. We try not to do that. We try to work cooperatively with the landlord to get requests taken care of, and there's always, the fair housing and legal aid options as well.
There's a question from Shannon about how much notice does a landlord have to give a tenant if they ask them to move. And so this one will depend on the circumstances of the move. If it's no fault of the tenant, if the tenant hasn't violated the rental agreement in any way, then the state of California, requires a 90-day notice for voucher holders. But at the same time, if the tenant is violating the program, Martha touched on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, if there are violations of the lease that are documented, then the landlord retains all of their regular rights to terminate that tenancy for those violations. So the tenants do have to continue following the rental agreement. And if the situation would warrant, a 3-day notice from the owner, as long as that's being issued legally, then the housing authority can't stop that from happening.
So I see a question here from Bocio Cruz. What housing retention or housing stabilization services, if any, are offered within the housing authority to prevent individuals jeopardizing their housing who need additional support maneuvering basic life skills? So this is a tricky one. We are not social workers. It's not our role. So when there is a social services group involved, we try to get releases of information so we can contact the supportive services provider to hopefully intervene. But that's a really sticky area for the housing authority, and it's not, unless there's a social services agency that's involved and we have a release, there's not really a lot we can do, sadly. Rebecca, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I just say that, you know, we try to intervene in situations like that. We refer people to resources, but the housing authority also has to remain neutral. We have contract with the tenant through their voucher. We also have a contract with the owner. So if there's situations that are you know, developing that are causing concern, and we see that the tenant is struggling, we are going to do everything we can to reach out, especially if that household or that family was referred through one of our special purpose programs, and we know that there were, you know, services available to them at one point. We're gonna, you know, try what we can to get them reconnected to services. But as Martha said, we don't have social work services. We have to be neutral in any disputes. We also do have there's a form that everybody who's on the program fills out. If they choose to allow us to, a family, they can put down an emergency contact person. And so that could be another family member, it could be a former case manager or somebody like that. So any situation that's developing that we feel like is going to be a threat to their tenancy, we would certainly be reaching out to that emergency contact if there is one authorized.
Okay, the next question: has public housing been a thought for Sonoma County? So neither Santa Rosa nor Sonoma County have public housing. It's not something that, it's sort of like an old school thing that all housing authorities are trying to phase out. What we replaced it with is project-based voucher programs. So to make specific units available to voucher holders. Are there any programs out of the area that have shorter waiting lists, or are they all about the same nationwide? I don't have an answer to that. I don't even, somebody would have to go around and look.
Yeah, there isn't any kind of like database. It would be really cool if there was, that, you know, demonstrates, you know, the length of waiting lists for each jurisdiction, but there's over 3,000 housing authorities in the country. So every community is going to be a little bit different.
How many people are currently using vouchers in Sonoma County? I do not have that information. I don't know. I know we have about 3,000 some odd vouchers, and we're probably about 95% leased up overall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's about our percentage too of our entire program, which is 1,903. I
Okay.
happen to remember.
There's some more acronyms that I don't really know. So Eileen Morris asked if the BBB bill passes. All I could think of is Better Business Bureau, but I don't know if that's what it means. How much more can the county expect in housing assistance?
I think that's the Build Back Better Act.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Eileen. Hi, Eileen. And we don't really know the answer to that question. Typically, when new funding is made available to housing authorities, sometimes we're the last to know. That's certainly how it's been with the VASH vouchers for a few different funding rounds. So if there is additional funding allocated for standard vouchers or any new vouchers, then what's going to happen is that it passes at the congressional level first, and then it comes to HUD. So Congress says, you get X millions of dollars to provide to housing authorities for this purpose, and then HUD has to take some time to figure out what the how that's going to roll out and what it's going to look like, and if it is a special purpose program, what those regulations are going to look like. So that's what happened with the emergency housing vouchers. And if there is something available to us in Build Back Better and it passes, we'll be very eager to receive those resources. But there's no way of knowing now what that might be.
So Jennifer Hainstock asks, how many people a year get a new voucher each year, both from county and Santa Rosa? Generally speaking, this county housing authority has about 350 to 400 what we call turnover vouchers. So people leaving the program for one reason or another. And we make every effort to immediately reissue those. I don't know about Rebecca's housing authority.
Well, that's a specific number I don't really have off the top of my head, but I know our attrition rate is about 6%, which means that's our turnover rate. So we, during the last couple of years, COVID has really had an impact on, just all of our operations and certainly on the rental market. So we haven't issued as many new vouchers in the last couple of years during COVID, but we are picking up on that now.
Great. So Danielle Danforth asks, are there funds to help with deposits? So generally speaking, the housing authorities, the only deposit funds that we have are through the emergency housing voucher program, with the caveat that there has to be no resource available with the service provider first. Rebecca, do you know of anything that I am not aware of?
No, the housing authority doesn't have, neither of the program doesn't cover. It's pretty clear in the program regulations that what we have money for at the housing authority, unless there's a special program like the emergency housing vouchers, or the housing authority has some special waiver that they're operating under, the money is for rental assistance and it's for administering the program, which is like paying your staff. It's not for any other purpose.
So that's everything in the chat. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A. So if there's a rapid rehousing participant who is also a voucher holder, which program requirements take precedence? For example, ESGCV states the need for a one-year lease, but housing authority says month to month is allowable. So it's whatever program funding is providing the rental assistance. So ESGCV, yes, one-year lease. Same with some of our continuum of care rental assistance programs. Our housing authorities, in an effort to get landlords more comfortable with the program, we've made a local determination that will allow month-to-month leases. We're allowed to do that. With some of the other HUD funding, that's not an allowable choice that people can make. Okay, and there's one last question. A couple qualified together with their voucher for a unit. They have since broke up, but cannot qualify on their own for a new voucher since they're both working now. Who should they consult with since neither can move out without losing the voucher? We call that a household split. And there is a household split process where each household member has an opportunity to, in Sonoma County Housing Authority, it's me, to meet with me to tell me why they should get the voucher. And then we look at, which household has minor children, disabled family members, elderly household members, and we take into consideration any domestic violence issues that may have led to the household split. And the housing authority will issue a determination, give the non-successful person 30 days to move out and issue the voucher to the new household. Rebecca, do you all do it differently?
We take into consideration all those same factors, certainly, and then also what's can be a determining factor is who's considered the head of household, meaning that's the person that initially applied for the voucher, back from the very beginning, from the waiting list, and who is determined to be the head of household, which is the person that sort of has the ultimate responsibility in the voucher issuance process. So that could be a factor as well. And if they're considered co-heads, meaning they both have equal rights and responsibilities, then that's when the factors that Martha described would come into play. But it can't ever become 2 vouchers. That's just something that we don't have the ability to do, because again, the vouchers need to come from the waiting list. So there would have to be a determination made for who's going to receive it.
Okay, well, that looks to be it of all of the questions. But Rebecca and my contact information are both on the slides, and I believe that it's on our websites as well. And we're available to answer any questions that you might have offline. And I know Susan's going to be sharing this recording with all of the registrants.
And I don't know if Dave, he did get to join us during the presentation. I don't know if he's there and wants to say anything, but I just wanted to express my thanks again to Dave for putting this together. And it was a great idea. We always enjoy the opportunity to share this information with the community and with interested parties. So I appreciate you doing it.
Well, again, I really appreciate all the effort put into it, the slides, the good attendance, and the good questions. So thank you back. And I had involved in a settlement conference at the same time, but I was listening in as the conference got boring. So again, thank you.
All right, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.